Monique Mullenkamp, Publicity Director at New World Library. I recently had the pleasure of sitting down with Linda Kohanov to discuss her new book, The Power of the Herd. I hope you'll enjoy the interview. The Power of the Herd looks at history, animal behavior, science, religion, and our current political and cultural challenges from the perspective of what you call non-predatory power. How did you discover this long-hidden form of power?
For many years, I avoided the subject of power altogether. I was working with horses, and I was working with people in organizations that were about uplifting all of our abilities to work together as teams. And I wanted to move beyond the old dominant submission forms of power, the ways that power have been misused. But then I began to work with a stallion, an abused stallion named Midnight Merlin. And he was one of these stallions that had been treated very poorly and became more oriented toward fight than flight. He became very, very dangerous. And my goal was to rehabilitate him with kindness and understanding and therapeutic techniques. But those weren't working at all. He would just go into a frenzy, like a soldier with post-traumatic stress, and attack me for no apparent reason. And I actually had to stand there and fight this horse off without also abusing him further. So I had to learn a kind of power that could stand up for myself and hold my ground with someone who was truly threatening my life. And I really mean he was threatening my life. And yet at the same time, I had to immediately go toward a constructive place of helping him move beyond these old patterns that he had that were causing him to be alienated from horses as well as people. And what I realized when he was attacking me over and over and over again for no apparent reason was that kindness and understanding couldn't begin to heal the wounds of that level of misused power. And I began to look at other forms of power throughout history and found that gaining the trust of an angry stallion is actually an ancient power story, one that predicts greatness. Alexander the Great gained the trust of the stallion Bucephalus, not through force, but through understanding backed by a kind of nonverbal power that I believe we all need to really affect social change. So the Buddha is another example. Prince Siddhartha, before he was the Buddha, also is known for gaining the trust of angry, very dangerous stallions that no one else could touch. And by learning to work with this stallion myself, I realized that there were a lot of nonverbal elements to power that no one was talking about because it's very hard to talk about these elements of power. And I began to see that George Washington, who was generally considered to be the finest horse trainer in the colonies, something that most people don't know about, he also had that ability to non-verbally exude a form of power combined with compassion and thoughtfulness and mindfulness that could transform extreme situations, not just with horses, but with people, with panicking, potentially violent people. And that I looked at his ability to use power in a non-predatory way and began to see that this kind of power existed in nature as well. I even found some early, long-ignored versions of the theory of evolution that talked about mutual aid as much a factor in evolution as this idea of survival of the fittest and competition for limited resources. And that mentality, survival of the fittest and competition for limited resources, is often used as an excuse in politics and business and in certain social activism circles as an excuse for using extreme power over dominance related techniques so that some people can thrive at other people's expense. But what we see in this book is that there's a huge amount of evidence historically, culturally, even in religions, as well as in nature, that shows that another form of power, non-predatory power, has existed the whole time and keeps trying to assert itself in our world. And once you understand the difference between predatory power and non-predatory power, the characteristics of both, which I have a chart of that in my book, then you begin to see that, yes, sometimes predatory power is useful, and I do talk about that, the lion-related forms of power. But there's also non-predatory power exemplified by an animal like the horse, which is, the horses are not rabbits. They're not quivering, gutless victims running and hiding all the time. They are non-predatory power animals. They're the perfect example of this. Mm-hmm. And they actually teach us how to develop that balance and learn a different form of power that pretty much takes an entire book to discuss. But partly because there are skills in this book. There are 12 chapters of guiding principles and skills that we can learn to use in the human world directly that begin to change unconscious power plays into opportunities for growth and success if we can manage to learn the difference between predatory power and non-predatory power.
Wow. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So how can the principles in The Power of the Herd benefit corporations, entrepreneurs, and business leaders?
I'm going to start with two statistics that are pretty well known at this point. The first one is that even between humans, only 10% of our in-person, interpersonal communication is verbal. So 90% of the messages we send back and forth to each other are in that nonverbal range. And where do we go to exercise that other 90%? It can be very difficult, especially now because we're hardly even talking in person anymore. Sometimes we don't even talk on the phone. Sometimes we're just texting. And yet we need to learn these interpersonal skills that involve nonverbal elements of communication in order to really be effective, especially as leaders. Leadership presence is a term we use a lot these days. Leadership presence is really hard to define because a lot of the elements of leadership presence are in that other 90% of the nonverbal range. And so one of the things I did was to create 12 guiding principles in Power of the Herd that help you to become conscious of the nonverbal elements and begin to exercise those. Recognizing also that some of the greatest leaders throughout history, regardless of their policy or agenda or their philosophy, a lot of the greatest innovators in history were exceptional horsemen, because as it turns out, horses exercise that other 90%. You can say anything you want to a horse, but if you don't back it up with real power and presence, they're not going to listen to what you're saying. So men like George Washington, as we mentioned earlier, Alexander the Great, the Buddha, they were all exceptional horsemen, as was Elizabeth I. Winston Churchill, believe it or not, was an exceptional horseman. We're used to seeing him later in life, all portly with a big cigar, but early in life he was an exceptional rider in the cavalry, and he learned a lot of things in that skill set that helped him later to manage fear in large groups of people and to get them focused and working together when they were actually significantly panicking for very good reasons during the wars. Another example that a lot of people find confounding is Ronald Reagan. Whether you agree with Ronald Reagan's policies or not, what you need to know is that he was an exceptional rider, and he actually learned a lot of the skills that allowed him to calm and focus people toward his goals from working with horses, and the book makes a strong case for that. But it also translates a lot of these skills into step-by-step processes that you can learn and take back with you to the business place. The other element that I want to talk about is the element of emotional and social intelligence. Those are big buzz phrases these days. And they've done a lot of studies recently on emotional intelligence, and they found out that even among scientists, who you would think don't need any emotional intelligence at all, even among scientists, emotional intelligence, high emotional intelligence, is 4 times more important than raw IQ and training in guaranteeing professional success. And so these are some significant emotional intelligence skills offered in this book that are now finally translated into words and into step-by-step processes for activating them in the workplace. And when you have a whole team of people who have an understanding of power that is not power over, but power that can rally people to work together toward a common goal, and when those people also have emotional intelligence skills and social intelligence skills, what you get is the power of a fully empowered herd working for you in your business and taking you to new heights of success that you never could engage if it's just one talented leader leading a bunch of people who have no power and no emotional intelligence skills. So that is kind of the theme of this book.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And another theme that you discuss is the important role of power and leadership outside of business settings. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes. I began to see that there's a lot of movements forward with people wanting things to change in the world, and they have different ideas and inspirations about how that can happen. And what I began to see as I was researching history from this perspective of non-predatory power, when it shows up and how effective it is, I also began to see that a lot of the difficulties we have, regardless of culture, religion, whether you're a conservative, whether you're a liberal, whether you're somewhere in between, what I saw there were what I call four Stone Age power tools that people are still using at an unconscious level usually to affect change. And these four Stone Age power tools are essentially like, having a computer next to you and then engaging interpersonally with somebody and whipping out a club and just beating him over the head. It shuts down communication, it shuts down cooperation, it makes people defensive. And taking a look at these four Stone Age power tools and how they affect you, not just at work, but with your family members, with people at church or in other spiritual communities you may be involved in. You see these active in spiritual communities as well. And so to become conscious of those and then to know of other things to do, other ways to manage your power, is a significant factor in this book. But one of the things I noticed too was that ultimately leadership is an advanced form of personal development. And I know that our publisher, New World Library, has a lot of amazing personal development books and spiritual books. And ultimately, once you go to that place where you increase your level of personal development and growth and you access your authentic vision, to engage that vision and to bring that vision into form in this world, unfortunately, for those of us who don't want to be leaders, you do need leadership skills. And so this book is filled with leadership skills for whatever goal you want to bring forward in this world. Whether that goal is raising children properly, because parenting is a leadership role. There are power plays in relationships between parents and spouses and children. And if you learn how to manage those more effectively, your family life immediately uplifts and changes. Same thing with spiritual communities or churches. Same things with artists. Same things with authors who write a really exciting book and then all of a sudden are asked to be a leader in the world. They suddenly need leadership skills. So leadership, from my point of view, is an advanced form of personal development. And it's the brave new world that all of us need to move into when we become fully empowered.
Oh, thank you, Linda. Thank you.
Thank you.